It's this like slightly hyperbolic fear that this underclass could grow to encompass basically every current worker in American society as soon as AI gets good enough to do all of our jobs.
Are you about to lose your job and become trapped in the permanent underclass, doomed to a life of servitude to AI robots and billionaires? As AI systems rapidly improve, researchers, tech executives, and economists are all putting forth this idea that millions of ordinary people could lose not just their job, but their economic value altogether. Soon, the biggest AI companies could reach artificial general intelligence and permanently shift wealth and power towards the corporations and elites who own the technology. Meanwhile, the rest of us struggle to survive. This idea is described broadly as the rise of the permanent underclass. And Jasmine Sun, a phenomenal freelance writer, recently wrote a piece for the New York Times exploring this idea. Today, she's joining me to talk about this topic, unpack whether or not we are actually all doomed, and what we can each do to navigate this incredibly rocky future. Jasmine, welcome to Power User.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so I want to start off by just explaining where this idea of the permanent underclass came from. You wrote this fantastic New York Times piece. Can you tell me a little bit about the origins of this concept and just the idea of an underclass of society?
So I had started to see the permanent underclass meme go around AI circles and tech circles like in 2025, early 2025 mainly, mostly on like Twitter and X, though I feel like I then saw it sort of appearing on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok also. So at first I thought that maybe it originated with the AI conversation, but then when I tried to do some research to understand when this concept really appeared, I realized that its roots were a lot deeper. And so like the first appearance of underclass that I could find in an American context was in the 1960s. And it was actually there are a lot of parallels to what we're thinking about today with AI, because it was in this book by the economist Gunnar Myrdal, and he called Challenges to Affluence, where he's writing about urban poverty. And because of the post-war automation boom, there are all of these factories that are getting automated and all of these factory workers in cities who are getting laid off. And so very similar to like a lot of the fears of automation we have today, you have classes of people who are working, who are happy, who had very stable lives. Technological change sweeps in, and through no fault of their own, these workers lose their jobs. And the thing that Myrdal writes about in his book is that they become part of an quote unquote underclass of society, not just in the sense that they've lost their jobs, like, okay, maybe now you can get a new job, but it's like quite hard to retrain and to reskill into new jobs. So many of these people struggle to do so. And B, once you lose your job, you're not just, economically excluded from society, but you're also often socially and politically excluded from society and end up on the margins, not really participating in civic life. Sometimes that leads to cycles of generational poverty. And so this idea of an underclass has to do with the notion that there is a persistent bottom rung or marginal side of society, people who are not only poor, but also socially and civically excluded. And that automation waves, these sort of disruptions caused by technological shocks, for example, can be one of the things that creates an underclass. And then since then, the idea has appeared in different contexts in American society. At one point, it gets racialized to talk about sort of whether it's Black urban communities or whether it's undocumented immigrants who people describe as an underclass because they too are maybe working low-wage jobs without actually political representation or participation in communities. And so it becomes this phrase that is a combination of economic and political disempowerment. And now with AI, I think the new part of the fear is the permanent part of the permanent underclass, where it's not just a sort of underclass that is limited to one group in society. It's not just an underclass you might cycle in and out of, but the idea that because AI and robotics will get so good, it will be able to fully automate any human labor. So any job a person could do, AI could do too. If that's true, then everyone in society who's currently a worker, which is most of us, end up being in the underclass because we don't have the economic mobility to do our job any better than a robot can. So like for a capital owner, for a wealthy person, why would they pay a human when they could pay a robot? And so the idea is that when AI gets really, really good, everyone will get frozen in their current class positions. If you're a worker now, you'll never be able to earn money again because AI can do your job. If you're a rich person now, you can spend that money to employ or rent infinite amounts of robot and machine labor to get even richer and keep building your wealth. And so it's this like kind of slightly apocalyptic, slightly hyperbolic fear that we are all, not just like a few people here and there, not just temporary underclasses, but this underclass could grow to encompass basically every current worker in American society as soon as AI gets good enough to do all of our jobs.
Yeah, I feel like it's always sort of pushed in the context of we're on the precipice of this. Like it could come, at any moment. Who are the main people putting forth this idea? And especially in the AI context, kind of what are they pushing and why are they kind of talking about this concept of the permanent underclass?
So the interesting thing is this meme is one that appeared in the context of Silicon Valley with regards to AI. So it's a lot of young tech workers spreading the meme on social media, whether that's founders or employees at startups and AI companies who are saying, I got to escape the permanent underclass. So that's sort of the way that people talk about it is like, I got to start a startup because that's the only way I can build wealth so that I can escape the permanent underclass. I got to get a job at OpenAI or Anthropic because with that startup equity, I'm going to get super rich and I'm going to escape the permanent underclass. Like if you are not doing these things, if you're not using AI, you are going to get stuck in the permanent underclass. And there's this idea that you have to outrun the machines by building wealth as quickly as possible with the help of AI. That's mostly being spread among these young tech workers. But I think it's also something that even people who are more senior in the space, some senior AI leaders have also expressed in other words. Like I think in a very long essay that Dario Amodei wrote, the CEO of Anthropic in January, he also writes about the fear that AI will create he doesn't use the word permanent, but create an underclass of people of quote unquote lower intellectual ability who might not be able to, again, outcompete the AIs. And so I think there's this pervasive anxiety that I'm noticing, like among just workers, leaders, executives in Silicon Valley who are all thinking, okay, if this AI is going to be so smart, like what value do the rest of us have? And they're sort of like fomenting these fears that every human is going to fall behind when AI gets good enough.
You mentioned Dario, but the tech companies have played a role, I would say, in kind of putting forward this vision as well. And I mean, I really started to notice this type of meme post ChatGPT, I guess 2022 on, while it's primarily being driven by, as you said, tech workers in Silicon Valley, who I think have this like fear and are in some cases being hit by some of these more recent layoffs as well. Like we're seeing some of the tech companies be the first to start automating tasks. Coinbase's CEO, Brian Armstrong, said like, oh, we have non-technical staffers shipping production ready code immediately. So, we're automating, et cetera. But it's also people that are outside Silicon Valley that are using something like ChatGPT and realizing, wow, like this can do my job really easily. Or, an analyst at a local insurance company realizing that their job can be quite easily automated away. What role does a company like OpenAI play in this? And how does their kind of like corporate philosophy feed into this idea of a permanent underclass?
Yeah. So one of the things I was really interested in examining in the piece is like, what is the role of these companies? Are they worried about it? Are they doing anything to stop their technology potentially being used to replace workers? Are they engaging in policy or sort of broader action? And OpenAI is like a particularly interesting case because I feel like they've actually been flip-flopping a lot over, which is, maybe nothing new for OpenAI, but like they have really changed their tune on this several times over the past many years. So like the thing about these AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and DeepMind is that they really believe they're building AGI. They really believe that their goal is to build AI that can do everything a human can do. And their mission is to create this. And I think like the OpenAI mission defines AGI as something that can do like almost all economically valuable tasks, which is basically, again, worker replacement. And if you read, say, this blog post called Moore's Law for Everything that Sam Altman wrote in 2021, he says very, very explicitly, like at the top of his essay, that yes, AI may create all of this abundance, but unless we do something about it, it's going to be really bad for workers. It's going to really increase returns to capital, decrease returns to labor. And therefore, he even starts proposing things like taxes on capital gains very early on in 2021. And he also stands up this economic research team within OpenAI over the next few years that does things like trying to understand how fast is labor substitution going to happen, what jobs are going to be affected first. And they started publishing papers 2022, 2023 to try to measure how much job displacement might occur. turnover. But the thing is, I think one broader trend a lot of people have noticed about OpenAI is that they have these like idealistic goals, especially at the beginning, but then they sort of become more and more of this like very profit driven company that is just trying to amass as much, power and wealth as possible to like fund their continued investments. And that becomes a lot less like the nonprofit research lab that they were in 2021 and a lot more like one of these like mega corporations. And so they end up bringing in some lobbyists and policy folks, most notably Chris Lahane, who's like a real veteran of political lobbying, who, started one of the biggest crypto PACs that, lobbied for pro-crypto legislation. And he comes in and he's like, wait, why do we have these economic teams that are publishing all of this stuff about how AI might displace workers? Like that makes us look so bad. Like we should not be doing this kind of unflattering research. We should focus on being solutions oriented and talking about the ways that AI is going to create wealth and help people. So there ends up being over the past couple years, all of this turnover inside OpenAI, inside the economics team that I was able to really report out, where a lot of the economists on their old team end up leaving the team, quitting their jobs over the last year, because now that lobbying and policy and government affairs has gotten involved, they've sort of reduced the independence of research and started saying, we need to be telling an economic story about how AI helps people. And most notably, one of the quotes I got from an ex-employee was, we don't want to talk about a problem until we have the solution for it. And the thing is, what that means is they stopped talking about problems at all. And they, for a very long time, kind of shut up about any risks to the economy or to jobs that AI might pose. But then again, in the last few months, they've changed tune again. And I think because the political winds have been shifting so much, with a lot of people worried about job displacement, a lot of folks in Washington taking this more seriously, and OpenAI goes, actually, maybe we do care about this. So they published like this big white paper proposing all sorts of policy ideas to deal with, again, declining labor share, potential shocks to jobs. And they start saying ideas like, maybe we should have a 32-hour work week. Maybe we should have like a public wealth fund where every American gets some equity in AI companies to make sure that they can share in the wealth. And, they're not committing to these ideas. When I asked them, like, are you guys supporting any current legislation? They were like, we're talking about it, but we're not committing yet. They have once again started embracing these more radical, economically progressive ideas and taking AI redistribution more seriously again. So OpenAI, frankly, has really shifted their tune, I think in large part driven by the PR goals that they have and whether they feel like it's more important to turn around a good story or to show, as they are right now, no, actually, we are responsive to your concerns. We do take these issues seriously. So it's kind of hard to tell, because I think that people don't know what to think when the AI lab leaders say one thing today and like another tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, I think OpenAI is just so full of contradictions as well. At the same time that they're sort of writing these blog posts or pushing these progressive policies, the 32-hour work week, et cetera, discussive universal income, they're also doing a lot more political lobbying. We have Greg Brockman putting an obscene amount of money into Leading the Future, the super PAC, and a lot of that political lobbying kind of seems opposed to those more progressive ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the like most notable examples of Leading the Future PAC, which of course, like you said, Greg Brockman donated to and was also shaped by Chris Lahane, their government affairs head, that one of the main races that PAC was entered was like the Alex Spores in New York, right? And he's this New York State Assemblyman. He's running for Congress, and he did two big things recently. So the first was he introduced the RAISE Act in New York. And this bothered Leading the Future and these accelerationists so much that they spent millions of dollars on these incredibly bad faith ads trying to like crush his chances winning a seat in Congress. And he also recently introduced an AI dividend plan that's actually, frankly, quite similar to the idea of a public wealth fund, where he advocates for the idea of, if we see further economic disruption, maybe we need an AI dividend that redistributes some of the wealth of these companies to Americans through like a token tax and different mechanisms. And again, this is someone who is supporting policies not dissimilar from the ones that OpenAI is saying are needed in their white paper. And yet their super PAC is the one that is spending millions of dollars trying to defeat him in the race that he actually is winning. So one of the questions that I'm really curious about is like, when OpenAI does talk about radical policy ideas, is it just marketing because they know that people are pissed off, or like, are they actually going to back that up with the political might? And like, frankly, given their record, like, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I know. I think it'll be interesting to see. I'm very skeptical of a lot of kind of what these tech companies claim, because as you mentioned, their marketing can shift constantly. And I think it's valuable to see kind of where the money's actually flowing. You mentioned Dario earlier, and I feel like a lot of, speaking of marketing, Anthropic's marketing, even about kind of surrounding AI safety, the power of these models, et cetera, has potentially fed into this idea of the permanent underclass. How is Anthropic treating this, and how do they view this issue?
Yeah, Anthropic is really interesting. Like, they are weird in the sense that they're not like the way that you normally expect a tech company to do marketing, right? Like, you normally expect tech companies to be more like OpenAI, where they're like, our product is so good. Like, what do you mean people are like depressed? Or what do you mean people are losing their jobs? Whereas Anthropic is actually, I think, pushing the job loss narrative probably harder than any other actor. Dario went on this media tour telling Axios, telling Davos folks like, hey, like, there's going to be a ton of white collar displacement. I think that as many as 50% of entry level white collar jobs will disappear in the next few years. And we need to do something about this now. Or like publishing this big essay that talks about, the potential for AI to create an underclass. And for Anthropic, I think what I think they genuinely believe these things. I don't think it's just marketing hype. I think that when people say, that, oh, like these people are just trying to hype up their own products, like having talked to these researchers, being a pretty skeptical person, like I do think that they genuinely believe it. Whether or not they're right is a different question, but they genuinely believe this is what's coming. And Anthropic sees themselves as the truth tellers. They see themselves as the industry Cassandra who's going to say the things that other companies won't, who is trying to build credibility by being the ones who are honest about the risks of AI. And so they're actually publishing a lot of research about potentially bad things that AI does, which I found really interesting to contrast with OpenAI, where there has been all this controversy about research independence. Anthropic's research teams are straight up publishing experiments that say things like, oh yeah, like a lot of people are delegating their like extremely personal decisions to Claude, and it's like screwing up their life. Or a lot of workers who use Claude to help them with coding tests end up not understanding anything about the code that they just wrote. And so Anthropic's actually been publishing and speaking out very regularly about AI harms at a very high level. But it also creates a kind of interesting dissonance because, well, I think I appreciate the honesty there. And I do think that a lot of their research has been super useful. When I asked Jack Clark, the head of the Anthropic Institute, who leads a lot of the societal impacts work, hey, are you planning on doing any policy advocacy to back up these ideas? He basically gives like a very long non-answer and is like, that's like a maybe thing for the future, but like we got to think about it. And again, when you look at Anthropic's business model, their business model is enterprise agents, things like Claude Code and Claude Cowork that are the primary thing replacing these white collar workers. And so even though I think they're really well intentioned, I'm always asking myself, like, their core business model literally depends on this job disruption. Customers buy Claude Code and Claude Cowork because these customers want to replace their workers with AI. And so even if Anthropic is doing, like, trying to warn about it, they're also, earning money off the displacement. And so I think there's only so much they can really do.
If you're watching this video and you like my work, please support me on Patreon via the link below or buy a paid subscription to my tech and online culture newsletter at usermag.co. That's usermag.co. I don't have any long-term brand partnerships, and a lot of my content is effectively demonetized. I've lost major brand deals for speaking out on certain issues and for challenging power. As you can imagine, advertisers are not exactly eager to work with somebody who covers a lot of the topics that I cover and talks about the things that I talk about. These videos I make are entirely funded by you, and I can't continue to make them without your support. So if you get any value out of the videos that I create and you want me to be able to create more, please support me on Patreon or Substack via the links below. On Patreon, I do bonus episodes, monthly Q&A live streams, and post frequent updates about my work. My Substack newsletter gives you a bi-weekly roundup of everything that I'm seeing and reading and paying attention to online. You can also get my newsletter on Patreon. Once again, the links to everything are below in the description. Every dollar of your support makes such a difference. It's interesting to kind of see their positioning. I feel like anytime we see this race between two top companies in a space, we usually have the first mover to the market that kind of is this category definer, I would say OpenAI. And then you sort of have their most direct competitor that often tries to position themselves as like the more responsible one. I'm thinking of like Tinder versus Bumble, where Tinder was first, Bumble came second, was like, no, we're We're like the good dating app, right? But they're ultimately like kind of both feeding each other, or even Uber and Lyft kind of engaged in this type of competitiveness early on, where Lyft was like, we're not like that, Uber company that's much more responsible. Like we do, we treat our drivers better. We care about our drivers, compared to Uber, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, I mean, OpenAI has a much more consumer-facing business model versus Anthropic, but it seems like both of them and just the whole industry as a general, like all of these companies are interested in moving their technology forward and getting widespread adoption. Do you think this idea of the permanent underclass is helping with that, or is it scaring people? Because it seems like a lot of people, when you talk to average consumers about their negative sentiment around AI, they bring up labor concerns, and it's a reason why they are choosing not to use these products.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I think there are two ways you can go, I think, as a consumer, for example, or as a normal person. Like, you can think either like, okay, this AI stuff seems really bad. I'm really worried about, jobs. I'm really worried about these other, like, I've heard this environmental stuff. Like, maybe I shouldn't use it. Maybe I should boycott it and I should resist AI in my workplace. So that's definitely one approach that we're seeing is some workers they'll either unionize or just personally sort of refuse to use AI because they don't want AI to spread in their workplace and put their own jobs or their colleagues' jobs at risk. And that's one reaction we're seeing. But the other reaction that we're seeing is this idea of, I got to escape the permanent underclass, so I better start using AI as much as possible because that's the only thing that's going to get me out. And so there's a way in which I notice that the permanent underclass kind of becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for some people, where, if you believe there's going to be a permanent underclass, then even if you don't think it's a good idea to, like, say, work for an AI company, or even if you don't really like using AI, you feel like it's the only way to beat everybody else and make sure you're one of the people who ends up winning or with enough money to escape automation, right? And so there's a lot of people who have this fatalism that's like, there's going to be a permanent underclass, so I better make sure I'm not a part of it. Or another way in which this permanent underclass becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes is these companies kind of assume that, like, eventually all the jobs are going to be automated. Like, that's the natural path of technological progress. And so we just better make sure we are the ones to do the automating. And you'll see them use these benchmarks increasingly that measure how good AI is at replacing people's jobs. And these benchmarks aren't like risk benchmarks. These benchmarks are how they understand, are we doing valuable work? So they're almost like competing to see which AI model is the best at replacing different human jobs, whether it's like banker or real estate broker or like news writer or like whatever else. And so I think there's a bunch of ways where, because people believe that the impacts are going to be so extreme and that you're going to see this really radical inequality, the way that some people think about it is to resist, but the way that others think about it is, oh God, I better make sure I'm on top. And I find that to be a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's this anxiety that a lot of people have, as you said. And it's like, yeah, you have to sort of be like Claude maxing or whatever to make sure that you don't fall behind.
I mean, it's kind of like the whole like gambling economy thing too. I mean, I follow that a little less, but it's like with crypto and with sports gambling and like everything else, it's like, I think people feel really economically insecure right now. I think they know that like the game is rigged and like a lot of people are going to be screwed over. And I think a lot of people feel like gambling or crypto or scams or, AI maxing or whatever it is, it's their only way to get out of like a very economically precarious situation.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned crypto, et cetera. I feel like, there's a lot of discussion about the tech industry overhyping, new technologies, and then those sort of the massive cultural or, economic effects of those technologies not playing out. Crypto is a good example of this. We've seen other kind of innovations. I would even say like when they were all obsessed with creator economy, overfunding a lot of these tools, like Silicon Valley constantly goes through hype cycles. How much of this is just a hype cycle versus how much do you think AI is genuinely sort of game-changing technology? I saw somebody on Twitter recently doing this whole thread of things that VCs have declared the new internet. And, I would say 99% of the time it doesn't shake out. AI does seem different, but, as somebody that follows this industry more closely, like, where do you see it?
I think I'm probably somewhere in between. Like, AI is just like everything else we've had. And the biggest AI bulls, like the people in the industry who are saying it's going to replace literally all human labor, right? So like, I should say clearly, like, I'm not a permanent underclass believer. Like, I do think there will be job disruption. And I think that we should be thinking about that and policymakers should start preparing for that. But the most extreme scenarios are probably not true. So in one sense, like, I think it's notable that AI consumer adoption has been really, really fast and firm adoption has been really, really fast. So like when you measure how fast a new technology diffuses throughout the economy, like how fast does it take for an app to get to 1 million users or 10 million users? I think ChatGPT from that measure is like the fastest growing app of all time or something like that. And so there's clearly a lot of product market fit. People really want to use AI. It can do all of these things. People find it useful or fun or whatever. And like, it is spreading faster than like almost every technology that we've had before. And so we should take the speed of that seriously. I think the other thing that we should take really seriously is that AI is to some extent general. It can't do literally everything. Like it has no physical presence right now. But in terms of cognitive tasks, like it can do a lot of stuff that it's never been trained to, and it's getting better pretty fast. And so the reason I think about this in the jobs context is because with previous technologies, maybe you have a machine that can replace one task, right? And then the person will just adjust and do a different related task. But the thing about AI is like, it can actually generalize maybe to the tasks around it too. So like, for example, I'm a writer. And so 3 years ago, AI could maybe only write at the level of like a sixth grader. And so I, as a, professional journalist, am not that worried about it. Or if you're like a college student, you're probably not that worried about it. Within like 2 to 3 years, I think now AI can write at the level of a college undergrad. And so college undergrads are now facing this threat in a way that they did not 3 years ago. And previously, machines in factories were not improving at that rate, where like they could get so much better and do so many more tasks that it's harder for humans to just readjust to something the AI can't do yet, because the AI itself is just improving so quickly and improving itself. So I think that aspect of AI is more concerning from both a jobs perspective and makes it a little different from other technologies, because it's not just one task. It's so many tasks and it gets better at all of them, even faster than humans can get better at all of them. Like AI can probably improve its own writing ability faster than most humans can. And I think that's pretty worrying. At the same time, the reason that I tend not to be as extreme as like a lot of the people who are in the industry is I think a lot of them just don't really understand how the economy works and like haven't had enough real jobs, which like sounds like kind of silly, but I think is true. Like, it is true that AI has like totally changed everything about software engineering, and every software engineer right now is basically using Claude Code. A lot of them don't even write code anymore. And the junior software market has totally shifted as a result. At the same time, like software engineering is like a very specific kind of thing. Like it's like something you can do on your computer without like talking to anybody in person. Every part of the job is like written down in a code base. So it's like very clear what all the context is. There's less like tacit knowledge that just lives in your head. It's very objective. Like either the code runs or it doesn't run. Like it's buggy or it's not buggy. So it's like super easy to test and design around. And there's all of this open source code on the internet. So you have all of this training data. But like a lot of jobs in the economy, like whether it's like, I don't know, like you work retail in a store, or like you're a salesperson and you actually have to like build trust with people and have dinners and like persuade them and like learn their kids' names and stuff like that. Like there's so many jobs that have relational or physical components, or that are just more subjective and like creative and taste-based, that AI can't do yet. And so I think that a lot of these AI researchers, when they say like, yeah, AI is going to be able to do every job, they just kind of assume that all jobs are like their job. They don't realize that like a lot of jobs in the economy are like super, super different and are just totally different beasts. And so they're still stuck in their mindset of like, I'm pretty smart and my friends are pretty smart. So like, if it can do our job, it can do everyone's job. And it's like, actually your job is like really specific and narrow and special. And so it's going to take a while before AI can do everybody else's job too.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, obviously, in the context of journalism, where, I mean, I have always had like, I think it's hard for AI to go out and like report stories. But at the same time, ironically, Leading the Future was paying this third-party consultant to run a AI-generated news website. And they actually had agents emailing people requests for comments. I don't know if they had them full FOIA requesting, but certainly requesting documents, et cetera. So I do think it can have a little bit more agency than people think. But as you mentioned, a lot of jobs are still so person to person based. A lot of this, sort of concern about the permanent underclass, or this idea that the permanent underclass arriving, is also tied to this idea of artificial general intelligence. And it seems like that's also kind of a disputed term, that some people don't even know if it's like something that can ever be reached, or we don't really understand a lot about human intelligence.
Yeah. So artificial general intelligence, or AGI, has been kind of this North Star for the industry for a lot of the past probably 15, 20 years. And the reason it originally came up is to make a distinction between artificial general intelligence and narrow AI. So like in the 1980s, when they were building AI, all of the AI was narrow. Like it's like we can build a chess playing bot, but it can only play chess. Like it can never play checkers. It can never learn poker. Like that system is so purpose built just to do one thing. And so the dream was we actually want to build systems that can do a wide range of tasks because as we talked about before, that's like a lot more economically valuable. If you don't need to purpose, like specially train it for chess and checkers and like dominoes, it can just learn all of that at once and generalize basically to new tasks. And so I think that AGI was originally a useful concept because for academic researchers, they could make that distinction. And the reason that now with LLMs, people are really interested in AGI is because one of the things that happens when you train on data from all of the internet is internet contains a lot of different general tasks in it. And so ChatGPT can do so many different types of things, right? Like it can write a poem and it can write code and it can generate pictures. And like all of these are pretty general compared to the older systems. But as for the milestone of building AGI, people totally disagree even within the industry about what that actually means. I think for some people, it is any job a human can do that is cognitive. Like as long as it's not a physical world task, AI needs to be able to do all of those things, including like writing like a really brilliant novel or something like that. Another thing would be some people say that AGI is AI that can self-improve, like AI that can build the next generation of AI. And that's important to people because once AI can build the next AI, then it'll just move faster and faster and faster. And you'll get what these people think about as an intelligence explosion. You'll have definitions of AGI that are more about like crossing some economic milestone, like AI can generate like a $10 trillion company on its own or something like this. And the thing is, like, I at one point tried to make a list of every definition of AGI that like every researcher and company has ever come up with. And they just totally disagree with each other. And I think I basically concluded like this term doesn't actually mean anything. It is an aspiration. I think it's helpful almost as like a myth for these people to orient themselves towards the same goal as like we want to build something that is artificial but has these like very powerful, flexible properties that can do as wide a range of tasks as well as like a human can do them, that can be, you know, better than a PhD level human at every single cognitive capacity. But I don't think it's going to look like a milestone. I think that like when people think of it, that like some finish line, like who's going to build AGI first, I don't think we're going to reach it and one day be like, okay, we all agree we built AGI. Like if a company says that they did, everybody on Twitter is going to argue about it and be like, no, that's not AGI yet because it doesn't meet my personal definition. And so like, I feel like just arguing over, you know, what AGI is and do we have it yet is like not that useful because like AI's impacts don't arrive when we get AGI. Like AI is already part of our lives and part of the economy right now. And so when we think about like education or work or security issues or whatever, like all of this stuff is popping up even before we have quote unquote AGI. And it's going to continue to happen when we get AGI. So I don't want to like create that binary of like, did we build it yet? And then only once we build it are all of these big consequences going to show up. At the same time, I think it's really important to understand the aspiration because I do feel like, again, as almost like a guiding myth of the industry, you can really understand these people's motivations better about what they're trying to build when you understand that they are trying to build something that is general, as flexible as a human is, and yet also smarter than humans at each one of those capacities.
Is there anywhere in the economy currently that we're seeing any kind of AI-driven permanent underclass start to emerge? You know, are there any kind of economic sectors that you're seeing just get very automated successfully in a way that, you know, is quite dangerous to workers?
Yeah. So there have been some economists and economic policy folks who have tried to do research on who's the most vulnerable to AI, because there's a bunch of things that basically determine like whether your job is actually vulnerable. Like one component, of course, is like, can AI do your job? Like, could the model in theory like actually do your job? But then there's other things like, is this industry like unionized or does it have a lot of protections so that workers can protect themselves from AI replacing their jobs, even if it theoretically could? Or like public sector unions, teachers unions, or even like professions like doctors and nurses where they're able to use medical regulation to sort of mandate that, you know, a human is always in the room or something like that. That's one component. Another one is something like, how easy is it for that class of worker to retrain into something else? Because the thing is, like, if you are, you know, a highly paid software engineer and your job gets eliminated, it does suck no matter what, but it's possible that some of those folks have the savings or they have the sort of other education and skills to try and retrain into something else where they're still useful. And so the people who are the most vulnerable to AI are people in industries that are not organized, that are not unionized, but also people who may not have as many resources to then just go learn something new. And so one category that people don't think about a lot is like clerical workers. So one of the most vulnerable categories is clerical workers who are mostly like 40 to 60-year-old women and often in suburbs and rural areas who are doing kind of administrative tasks, mostly computer knowledge work tasks. Because they're a little bit older, they are not going to have a super easy time just learning a brand new skill from scratch once you're already older. And they're not unionized. And basically, I feel like nobody is thinking about this group of workers in like the media class, at least, or in the AI industry, because they don't think about like, you know, a 50-year-old mom in Minnesota who maybe she only has a high school education, but she's been doing this sort of clerical work to support her family for the last few decades. And if she gets laid off from her job because of AI, it's going to be super hard for her to find something else to learn and do something new from scratch. The other category, of course, that people are talking about more is like college grads and like young people right now, because we're seeing that like people who leave college right now are graduating into a really, really tough job market. People debate on, is it because of AI? Is it not? But the fact of the matter is, like, if you are planning on doing a knowledge work job, entry level hiring is much lower than it used to be. You don't have work experience again. So like, yes, you may have your college degree, but you don't have enough experience to like super easily switch into something new. You probably don't have savings. And frankly, another thing that I think people don't talk about enough is like a lot of these college students relied on AI for like all of their homework during college. And so they don't have as much of a skill base as they ought to have. And so like one thing that I'll hear from, you know, hiring managers at companies is like, why would I hire a 22-year-old with Claude Code when I could just use Claude Code? Like the 22-year-olds who are coming into the workforce right now literally aren't as trained as they could be because they've over-relied on AI, and that makes themselves even more at risk. So I think those are two categories I think about a lot, are like mostly older secretarial workers in rural and suburban areas, plus the college grads who are coming into the workforce.
Already, AI is shaping up to be this major issue in the 2026 midterms. What has the political response from people in DC been to this, you know, idea of the permanent underclass? Are there, I mean, you mentioned Boris earlier, who's made sort of AI a center point of his campaign, but are there people developing policies that are getting traction? How is DC responding?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think there's a ton of movement right now in DC, and we're going to see more and more over the next year. I've been spending a little bit more time moving between SF and DC over the last few months, just because you can see it heating up. I think that like even last year, I would say that policymakers were mostly not taking AI job loss that seriously. And that's mainly because when you look at the job data, you don't really see a lot of job loss. Like maybe you see a little bit of impacts with early career workers, like these young workers, but for the most part, like unemployment seems fine, like hiring seems fine. You don't really notice it. And policymakers, you know, Congress people are super old. They probably don't use AI themselves. Like they're just not really thinking into the future. And so they're kind of waiting for it to become a problem before they act. I think what's really changed over the last few months is that normal people, normal workers, like citizens, do kind of see what's coming. Like they see their bosses talking about AI, they see the layoffs that are happening, and they are getting super, super worried about what's going to happen with AI in the future. And am I going to get stuck in a permanent underclass? And that is actually putting a lot of pressure on politicians to start thinking of a plan and messaging around AI, even if it's a little bit early in terms of the data. So I am seeing a lot of movement, both in the policy communities and in like congressional offices, to start to think about these problems. I wouldn't say that most folks have already put out plans as to like, do I support a UBI? Do I support a jobs guarantee? Do I support this or that? But like, you know, I've gotten calls and emails from multiple offices, congressional offices, since writing my piece about trying to think through labor impacts, both on the right and the left. So another thing is that AI issues are really bipartisan. Like if you think about jobs, like that affects literally everybody. There's no American of any party who's not worried about their jobs. And so I think another interesting thing is that AI is not really arranging itself across the normal partisan lines. And there are a lot of policy organizations and advocacy groups that have people from the right and the left sort of coming together to focus on issues like protecting workers or thinking about education, things like that. But again, like, you know, I don't think there's a lot of actual policies that are serious that are being put out right now. It's very much still at the ideas and brainstorming stage. And my sense is when it's really going to break out is probably the 2028 presidential campaigns or like the gubernatorial campaigns, where presidential candidates and governor candidates are going to start trying to announce really big AI plans in order to differentiate themselves from other candidates. Because it's the kind of thing you can campaign on, is like, you guys are scared about job loss. We're expecting these impacts in the next 1 to 2 years. And I'm going to be the person to guarantee, say, like wage insurance or a jobs guarantee or like retraining programs for college grads or like whatever it is. I think that people are going to be running on flagship AI related platforms because more and more people are starting to care about it. And it's something that, candidates can differentiate themselves on.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about also in your New York Times piece about these candidates seeking to harness this rise of populist sentiment, especially among American workers. And you also talk about how if workers hear that AI is going to entrench this permanent underclass, they will do anything to stop it. And I feel like this idea of the permanent underclass has also given rise to the ban on data center construction in places like Maine, the fighting back against self-driving cars, these extreme sort of censorship and surveillance laws around chatbots. And, I'm curious about that sort of populist rage and anger and how you view it and how you see that being channeled. I know a lot of people have also spoke about in tech that they are concerned about it, or they think that this is ultimately dangerous for these politicians to be feeding into this.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, we saw like the guy throwing a Molotov at Sam Altman's house recently. Obviously, all these data center protests, like this random Indianapolis councilman who approved a data center project got like a gunman came to his door and shot at it 13 times. Like, he wasn't hurt, but it's terrifying. And left a note on the door that said no data centers in all caps. And maybe it's about just the data center. Maybe he's just like a really big NIMBY who like really doesn't want a new building in his neighborhood. But like, my suspicion is that with things like the data center activism, some of it is about the construction and the fact that they don't want it. I think a lot of it is actually generalized rage at AI and at corporations and at billionaires. Like, it's like we have already been, as you know very well, like in America, where a lot of people, especially young people, feel like the system doesn't work for them, feel like economic mobility is broken, feel like billionaires are taking bigger and bigger a share of the pie. And there's, you get things like support for Luigi Mangione. If we don't feel like we have democratic means to stop the accumulation of wealth by the 1%, then I think a lot of very angry people start turning to whatever they can find. And for some people, that's posting angry on the internet. For other people, it's like protesting the data center construction in their neighborhood. For other people who are very extreme, it's like assassination attempts. And I think that the problem is when people feel like they are part of a broken system and they feel like the normal channels of, democratic voice don't work. They feel like voting doesn't work. They feel like normal, just like, let me email my congressperson doesn't work because there's so much money in politics that there's, no chance that you can do anything about it. Then they start going a little rogue and turning towards these other means or advocating for very, very extreme policies. Even with things like the data center moratorium, when I talk to folks who are in support of the moratorium, which is basically like, we are not going to build any new data centers until we come to an agreement on jobs, kids' safety, all of these different issues. Like, the politicians like Bernie and AOC who are supporting that, they know that the moratorium is not going to get passed. They don't even want to have a permanent moratorium. What they are using is trying to find the most extreme form of leverage against the companies. And they will basically say, like, the point of the moratorium is to find one place where we have any chance of sort of intervening in what the AI companies are doing, any chance where there's a democratic process, which in this case is like zoning approvals for data centers or whatever, to intervene in the ability to build AI, block it there until you can come to the table with civil society, with workers, with parents, with whoever. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people feel right now is that AI is coming into everyone's lives, but there is no democratic channel. Like, most people don't know anyone who works in AI. Most people don't know anyone who works in AI policy. If they're upset about the way that AI is showing up in their community or their school, or they're just really scared about their jobs, they feel like they have no means to do anything except, let me try to ban self-driving cars. Let me try to ban these data centers in my neighborhood. It's like this very localized action against a thing that is frankly not really a localized phenomenon. And so I think from my perspective, I really want to see more policy action and also communication from more policymakers at a state and a federal level to say things like, hey, like, if you're like a taxi driver and Waymos show up and you lose your job to a Waymo because like there's no more taxi drivers anymore, like, we are going to save you. We are going to give you unemployment insurance for like 2 years instead of 6 months because we know it takes a lot of time to like train into something new. Or we are going to give you like free access to like a trade school or community college. We're going to do all these things for interview, I feel like people just feel like there is no plan. There's no reassurances that they're hearing. And if they lose their job through no fault of their own, no one's going to help them. And so, of course, if you believe that, you're going to just try to ban the thing that is going to take your job. And what I really want to see is I want to see policymakers and the AI companies, frankly, responding very directly to people's concerns, saying that like, you are right to be concerned. Like, you should have economic security and it's not your fault if like technology shows up and changes your job. And we are going to take some of the profits from that technology and ensure that like you can have healthcare and like you can have a good life and you can find time to do something new. Because that's, I think, what people are responding to is like, they don't trust the government or companies to save them right now. And like, I don't think they have a reason to trust that.
You quote Alex Karp in your piece, and there's a lot of rhetoric around the sort of accelerationists that are very against this, idea of stopping technological progress, saying, well, if we don't do this, like China is going to catch up or beat us, in this sort of like theoretical AI race. And I'm curious, are we seeing similar concerns about a permanent underclass like play out in other countries like China that are also adopting AI at, high rates and moving forward into this like technological AI driven future?
This is super interesting. Yeah. So I was in China for the past couple of weeks. And I did, when I was talking to either AI researchers or when I was just talking to like normal people in China, my relatives, like random people, I'd ask them like, how do you feel about AI? Do you use it? Are you worried about jobs? Whatever. And I think it's pretty different from the US. There's a few reasons for that. So one is China has a lot of youth white collar unemployment for totally unrelated reasons. And so they've been struggling with like as high as 20 or 25% youth unemployment for years. It's not because of AI, it's because there are too many college grads and not enough jobs for those college grads. They have lots of factory jobs, but most college grads don't want to take the factory jobs. And so they're just not doing anything. So one is like China already had a lot of high unemployment. So AI is not really changing that. What we are seeing though is one on an individual level. I think China has much more of the culture of people think, I need to use AI so that I don't fall behind. So in terms of do you resist and protest or do you use AI and try to escape? I think most Chinese people lean much more towards I need to adopt OpenClaw. I need to use, DeepSeek or Doubao is the one that a lot of them use in order to make sure that I am not falling behind, because China has always been a very economically competitive place. Like there's like over 1 billion people there. Every job is highly, highly competitive. And even before AI came along, it was like, you better grind, you better work 996, you better adopt all of the technology, because if you don't take this job, there are 1,000 people waiting behind you to take the job. So the orientation is already towards like adopting the technology in order to win. There are other factors. Like I think that the Chinese government has some policies and legislation in place in order to protect employment further, because unemployment is already such a big problem and the Chinese government cares so much about social stability that they are really worried about increasing unemployment at all. And so the government has added a lot of friction to prevent AI layoffs. So it's very hard for companies to lay people off. I have an aunt who works at a state-owned enterprise in China. I asked her like, hey, do you use AI at your job? And are you worried about getting laid off because of AI? And she said, I do use AI to help me with my work. I do know that actually AI can now do the job of 2 people at my work. Like I'm aware of that. But because of these legislation, like they're not allowed to lay me off for that reason. Like we're all going to use AI to do our work a bit faster and easier, but like we're not going to get laid off because there is a legal mandate that they not do that. And so like I think policies like that make people feel more comfortable, and I think that the US, if we start to see more unemployment, we should consider things like that. I think layoffs are freaking traumatic. And like as much as possible, if a company can instead say, let's do more with the workers that we have rather than just laying people off, I think that is the path that people should go down. So I think that China is at least being quite a bit more proactive, and the US, frankly, it's worth us watching what works and what does not work from the policies that they try to employ, because they're just trying a lot more stuff. They also have more like jobs programs. Like this is again before AI, but because there's so many people and the government's really scared of unemployment because they think people are going to protest, and the Chinese government's authoritarian, so they're really scared of activists. They think that if everyone has a job, they're not going to like protest or be unruly. And so you see a ton of investment in public works, like in public parks. Like there's people who are sweeping clean streets in the parks. There's so many gardeners. Like the immaculate landscaping. I've never seen so many gardeners in public parks before. And they're just like really, really well maintained public infrastructure because the government has just decided to create tons of public infrastructure jobs, partly to make the public spaces nice. And, it's great to have clean streets. Like I love that, but also literally to give people jobs so that people have something to do and have some source of income, which I also think is worth us thinking about. I mean, during the Works Progress Administration, like we also in the United States decided to just invest in our national parks and public infrastructure. And I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think also during that same period, we saw this like expansion of just the economic safety net, and which has been eroded over the sort of past several decades, which is, I think, part of why people are so scared of ending up in this permanent underclass, right? There's no healthcare. There's no system. Like,
yes, healthcare is tied to employment. Like, it's like, if you lose your job, how are you going to have healthcare?
It's terrifying. So I understand kind of like American workers' fears. I'm curious, kind of like what indicators you're watching as this all plays out, you know, and what should people pay attention to? You mentioned before, people are sort of falling into this like bifurcated camps of like, screw AI, let's kill all tech, like end it now, versus like, all right, I'm going to try to adopt and become this kind of like AI enabled employee. You know, as people and listeners navigate it, like what should they be watching out for? And like what like economic indicators or sort of other trend lines are you watching to see kind of which way the wind is going on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely worth keeping an eye on the economic data. I wouldn't focus so much on individual layoffs, because it is true that sometimes companies will say we're laying people off because of AI, but it's actually for other reasons. And so those are a little bit unreliable. But like, I think looking at both like unemployment data, but also like the rate of new hires. So like one thing that we're seeing already is that layoffs are actually less common than slowed hiring. So one of the things that I expect to happen is it's not that companies will do big layoffs, but that they just won't hire new people. And so again, that affects entry level workers the most. But I would try to look at rates of new hiring for different jobs and industries. I also think that part of it is I recommend that people try to use the technology, even if you don't like it, because that's also what teaches you what AI is good at and not good at, and teaches you whether your own job is at risk. You know, like it's like as a writer, like I, every once in a while, will try to have ChatGPT or Claude write my piece for me. I never copy paste any of the sentences. I do completely the writing from scratch, but I do that because I want to know how good AI is at my job. And it's actually very helpful to sort of what I call like feel the jagged edges of the technology. Like one thing I learned from that is like AI is pretty good at writing a single sentence, but it's like really bad at writing like long text. Like it cannot write a 5,000 word essay, or like, as you know, like it's not very good at reporting. It can't really build trust with sources. And so I think it's worth any worker trying to use AI to see if it can do your job, and doing that every like 6 months or something like that, because that's how you're going to know the state of the technology. And you might learn like, okay, AI is really good at this part of my job, so maybe I'll actually decide to use AI to help me with that. But AI is super terrible at that part of my job, so I'm actually going to invest in that area. Because I think the thing that people need to be doing now, especially if you're young, is like, think about the skills that are very hard for AI to develop, like whether that's relational skills, like building trust with people, whether that's like a skilled trade or a physical thing. Like there's a lot of different skills that AI is like not that good at yet, like entrepreneurship, art, things like that. And those might be areas that you decide to like build up in your career. Like, I'm not sure if like the way to like max out and like beat AI is just to use AI as much as possible, because that's where I start to get worried about like de-skilling and like you over relying on AI. And I'm not saying don't use AI. Like I use it as part of my process, but like also like everyone has access to those tools. I would say actually like in a world where AI can do a lot, there are still some areas that it's not going to be good at for a very long time. And that's where I hope that people invest, is like creativity, having good taste and judgment, like having really amazing people skills, being very empathetic, like being good with your hands and good at making stuff in the world. All of that is going to be super, super useful for quite a while.
Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for joining me and chatting today. I appreciate it so much, and I'm such a fan of your work.
Thank you so much. The feeling is so mutual, Taylor.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of Power User. If you like my work, please support me on Substack by buying a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at usermag.co. That's usermag.co. Or you can support my work on Patreon via the link below. You can get my newsletter via Patreon. I also publish bonus episodes, do a monthly Q&A live stream, and more. And the only way that I'm able to produce it and continue to do my freelance reporting work is thanks to the direct financial support of people like you. Truly, every single dollar of your support makes such a difference and ensures that this show can continue. So please click the links below, support my work, and I'll see you next week for a brand new episode of Power User.